Ladies and metalfish, this is your handsome and hard-boiled duelist, Daddy Janjo here. So, oh boy, an FTK format. Here we go. So we last left off at the final Shonen Jump Championship at SJC Edison. This was a sweet spot in the game's history, for it was post-March ban list, of which I covered in that format's video, and it was pre the upcoming core set that would heavily impact the meta. And this spot in particular thrived in creative deck building and card theory galore. Thus, we had a format defined by a single event, and also the end of the Shonen Jump era. But history marches on, and all good things must come to an end. So here we are with the summer of 2010, a period that changed everything with a single set. With the March ban list, many top decks of the past were hit, like Zombie and Lightsworn. This meant new land was to be seized by any duelist daring enough with, as Pojo magazines would describe them, hot new decks. We saw a variety from the first event post-ban list SJC Edison in April 2010. Flamvel, Machina Gadget, and Quick Draw Plant, just to name a few. The last of which would end up taking first place. We've seen sets like Invasion of Chaos shake up the meta by a wide margin, so who's to say this deck will remain top dog moving forward? The first release post-Edison would be the May Shonen Jump Volume 8, Issue 5 promotional card, 100 Eyes Dragon. Not quite 1,000 eyes, but it's better than nothing, I suppose. This is a new level 8 synchro that requires a Dark Tuner and one or more non-tuner fiend monsters, yet its effect is solid given that once per turn, you can banish a level 6 or lower dark effect monster from your grave, and until your end phase, drag his name and effect becomes that set monster's name and effect. Given the high amount of useful dark monsters within the first 8 years of the game, you can probably bet the uses this new synchro could get. After all, it's similar to Phantom of Chaos, which saw meta play in Dark Creator Turbo decks during 2008's Gladiator format. With 3,000 attack and a solid enough effect, if you could gain access to summon 100 Eyes Dragon, then you might want to consider running it. The big release for the format would be on May 11th, 2010, and that would be the core set, The Shining Darkness. Happy birthday to me. Aside from introducing the Watts archetype, the set is mostly known for adding support for Blackwings, X-Sabers, and Infernities. Infernities, till this point, only had a couple of releases. Their debut in the video game Stardust Accelerator in May 2009 as promo cards, and a single card in Stardust Overdrive in November 2009. With the release of this new core set, it was the first time you could make a true dedicated deck, since now there was plenty of support like Infernity Mirage, Launcher, and Barrier. Blackwings got their own Signet Dragon and Blackwing Dragon that was only a hyped up letdown. In regards to synchros, Infernity Doom Dragon was much better, and X-Sabers got primarily double X-Saber Bogart Knight and double X-Saber Dark Soul. Oh god, Dark Souls, Archetypes aside, big cards would include Ronin Totem, Herald of Perfection, and Spore. Solid tech cards included Intercept Wave, Into the Void, Chaos Trap Hole, and Silent Graveyard. We'll get into some of these cards in a little bit. Considering the set contained a plethora of cards that made a new archetype, improved pre-existing decks, fun tech, and a whole wave to the meta otherwise, The Shining Darkness is a core set that can't be understated in its importance to the history of Yu-Gi-Oh! With a new set now released and no more Shonen Jump Championship tournaments, what happens now? Where do we go from here? Let's take a trip down to Washington, D.C., the capital of planet America. This would be the birth of the YCS Yu-Gi-Oh! Championship Series. The Pilgrims landed in D.C., where they saw the Washington Monument, and so shall duelists centuries later on May 16th, 2010. If it were up to me, the finalists should have duel on top of the obelisk like Battle City, but that's just my thought. Immediately, the effects of the Shining Darkness could be felt. While a tried-and-true strategy like Gadgets made it to first place by Peter Chang using the Machina engine, other top decks included Infernity, X-Saber, Herald of Perfection, and Frog Monarch. Clearly, duelists were still getting a good grip on the format given the floodgates opening on new cards and strategies. And even still, you could see this as a taste of things to come, for we're not done with the releases quite yet. June 23rd would see Gold Series 3 that, while including nothing new, did give us reprints on the Infernity promo card so more duelists can get a hold of them, and a plethora of Blackwing staples. Then, already at the next YCS in Chicago on July 19th, we'd see the first swing of Meta Tempo. This would be the premier event where Infernity got first place by Omar Belden. That said, now is a good time to take a closer look at these infernal monsters. This new archetype revolves around monsters activating their effects when the controller has no cards in hand. Quite a unique playstyle that sounds terrible on paper. Thankfully, with the wide variety of new cards, the strategy was easy to pull off in a control deck with combo capabilities. Archfiend searches Infernity cards. Necromancer special summons a different Infernity from the graveyard. Mirage can tribute itself to revive 2 Infernity monsters. Beetle can tribute itself to special 2 from deck, as well as Beetle being a tuner. Another tuner is Avenger that can recur other Infernity monsters if they're destroyed by battle. When it comes to back row cards, you had Inferno that would help you discard cards from hand, as well as sending Infernity monsters directly from deck to grave. Really, the most important two are Infernity Barrier, a solemn judgment for the archetype, and Launcher, a continuous spell that once per turn, it sends an Infernity monster from your hand to the grave. In addition, you could send Launcher to grave to revive 2 monsters. Combining this with Archfiend, you could potentially activate all 3 launchers in a turn and end on a large board of synchros. Inferno would help get specific cards at the grave like Archfiend or Tuners to accomplish the ideal field. Remember, since this was all new, all the power cards were at 3 copies. When it came to the extra deck, Synchros continued to remain a strong and necessary presence. Synchro check time. Armory Arm was a key synchro for while you control a Colossal Fighter, you equip an arm to an opposing monster with higher attack to crash, and revive Fighter while your opponent would take damage via Arm's effect. Wash, rinse, and repeat to win the game. Best level 5 would be Catastor to deal with any non-dark monster, and Magical Android still existed. Generic level 6s would include Gaia Knight, the Force of the Earth, Splendid Rose more in EU scenes, Goyo Guardian since it was still at 1 copy, and Bryonak, also at 1, to send away cards from hand to take care of on-field threats, a great piece for Infernity combos. Level 7 still had Black Rose, while the level 8 roundup like Stardust Dragon was still good, same with Arcanite Magician, and now you had 100 Eyes Dragon in the fray to copy effects like Archfiend or Mirage. Infernity Doom Dragon existed now too, which has monster destruction and burn capabilities while also keeping Infernity Barrier alive. However, with 3000 attack, you could just summon this dragon and use it as a big beat stick too. Not to leave out level 9, they had Mistworm, still powerful in its own right. And if you're enjoying this video, then consider subbing if you haven't, or liking this video if you have, or even sharing it out so my channel can get more eyes on it. 100 eyes perhaps? If you want to take that support even further, then become a Janjo patron for as little as $2 a month to ensure the future of the Janjo Zone. Your help goes a long way. Still at YCS Chicago, Blackwing managed to get 5th, still showcasing their power even if Blackwing Dragon was a overhyped new card. We also saw in 5th a Herald deck by seasoned duelist Jeff Jones. This new deck revolves around the newly released Ritual Herald of Perfection. This fairy has the effect where, during either player's turn, when your opponent activates a spell, trap, or monster effect, you can send 1 fairy-type monster from your hand to the graveyard, negate the activation, and if you do, destroy it. So a solemn-like effect at the cost of a fairy monster in hand, no less. Pretty good. Combining with powerful monsters like Archlord Christia to lock special summons, and powerful traps like Royal Decree, this Herald lock strategy was quite a popular one at Chicago. With all the discarding effects, using cards like Advanced Ritual Art or Dark Factor of Mass Production to send and recur normal fairies respectfully became a sound strategy. Jeff Jones would select Yakutenu Megami, Happy Lover, and Moki Moki, yeah! Herald Lock would lose steam after this event, yet it was nice to see early showcase of the deck's strength. Now let's skip ahead to Nationals season on July 10th in both Canada and the United States. South America also had their World Championship qualifier in late June with some notable showcases of Lightsworn, Hero Beat, and a first place Frog deck we'll dissect later. But otherwise, the North American WCQ was the place to be in the summer of 2010. Canada would see Infernity take first once again, with a Diva Hero deck making it to third place. Much like Hero Beat in Southern America, the remnants of Edison Fury was still trying to hold on in a forming meta. But like most waves in the TCG, the US WCQ would set the trends moving forward. Topping decks would include Gadget, like we've seen before, Caliber Cat, and even Gladiator Beast will continue to push regardless of their diminutive return. Another top deck would be Frog Monarch, a more anti-meta deck of the format. While this deck can still do what Dupe Lock does, a play we'll discuss soon, it also uses frog monsters for powerful monarchs like Ryza and Caius. In addition, it uses Vanity's Fiend to stun, which many decks did not have an out to. On top of that, you had a lot of hand traps around now. Battle Fader, DD Crow, and Gores. It's certainly reminiscent of a GX era deck. Yet with a variety in the top cut. First place would go to the other deck, Shining Darkness Improved, X-Saber, piloted by Sean Montague. Much like Infernity, this was arguably X-Saber at their peak. Sure, Rescue Cat was at 1 and Dark Strike Fighter was banned, but Cat was still legal, and so were Summoner Monk and Air Bellum. Compared to their previous height of spring 2009, now with Emmer's Blade, Voltroll, and more recently Dark Soul, the deck gained new strength. Dark Soul, when it's sent to the grave, you can add an X-Saber from deck to hand during the end phase. At this point in the game, it was ruled that if you use its effect multiple times, the search would stack for a potential upwards of 5 draws, with your opponent having close to no cards in hand if used with Gotems. This ruling would later be changed, and it gave Cat a second name to summon. Voltroll was a special summon and had Grave Recursion for a low-level X-Saber. The new Bogart Knight would let you special a low-level X from hand. Dark Strike Fighter or not, your opponent was now on a clock. Tick-tock. Gold Sarcophagus would be a popular tech to search any of your combo pieces. Monk, Cat, or even Cold Wave. Wave would be great to ensure combo and let Hyunlei destroy the back row without worry of channables, plus it messed with their following turn. Gotem's Emergency Call would work in the mirror match too, since it didn't matter who controlled the face-up X-Saber monster. Trap Stun was a fun card to turn off your own Royal Oppression for a turn. With Wayne, Hyunlei, and Gotems, in addition to all the other playable synchros, the X-Saber Cat strategy still worked beautifully and lived up to the hype. July 17th would see the EU Championship with a higher Frog deck rep. What's going on there? The suspension is terrible. I hope it'll last. July 20th would see Hidden Arsenal 2 that introduces the Naturia, Dirac, and Fabled archetypes. It also had further support for a variety of other archetypes too. Big cards in the set would include Naturia Beast, an Earth Synchro known for negating spells by milling 2 cards, Mist Valley Apex Avion that has a bouncing effect to negate and destroy an activated effect, and Dewarren Tiger King of the Ice Barrier, a water synchro with a powerful Trunade-like effect that included an attack boost as well. You can see the 5Ds era at this point gearing towards more negation tools than ever before. My grandfather used to play Magic Jammer until he synchro summoned Naturia Beast. Continuing down the Starlight Road on August 7th, and we're at YCS Indianapolis. Gravekeeper got 9th place, which is nice to see, but first place would go to an anti-meta stun deck. If you weren't playing Frogs, Infernity, or X-Saber, the remaining Edison strategies more or less melded into this anti-meta strategy. Anthony Mayer would use monsters like Banisher of the Radiance, Doom Caliber Knight, Fossil Dyna, King Tiger, and Thunder King, backed up by a heavy trap lineup to completely control the game. While the deck didn't see much play aside from this event, the fact that it did get first place cannot be ignored. And then we move on to the final event of the format, and what better finale than the 2010 World Championship on August 14th through the 15th. Participants here would be able to redeem stamps for a special card pack, including some reprints like Structured Deck Boss Monsters, and new cards to the TCG like Monster Eye, Alligator Sword Dragon, Muyon, Curry, Key Mace, and Drollbird, plus a bunch more. Top Cut would see a plethora of decks from duelists all around the world. Glad, Frog Monarch, Machina Gadget, Quick Draw Plant, Infernity, and even a Gigavise deck. Weirdly enough, that there were no X-Saber representation here. In addition, third place would be Herald of Perfection, with second going to Blackwing. Unfortunately, no deck list exists from these topping duelists. What we do have, however, is the first place deck by Galileo de Obaldia from Panama, piloting Frog FTK. It's no shock that, by this point, you had a toolbox of powerful decks to pick from. What set the Frog deck apart was that it had the potential to combo into an FTK over setting up an overbearing board. The deck was based around Substitute, Mass Driver, and the newly released Ronin Toden, which quite frankly has one of my favorite arts in the game. The FTK worked by getting Substitute and another monster out. You can use Sub to keep cycling through frogs until you end up with 20 engraved. One of the monsters used for this is Poison Draw Frog, which lets you draw a card every time it's sent to the graveyard. Ronin banishes a frog to summon itself, which can be further used with Sub. With Mass Driver, you can tribute a monster to inflict 400 points of damage, basically a spell variant of Cannon Soldier. So the idea was to use all these cards to loop for a burn victory. The scary thing was that the combo was consistent and could equally grind. Quite honestly, you didn't even need Driver to win, as your card advantage would be like that one guy who brought a conga line to the tournament. This was a Frog control deck by themselves, given as Dupe Frog could draw in attacks, Sub could make Dupe indestructible, Unifrog could attack directly or remove back row, and Flip Flop Frog could return a bunch of cards too. This is basically a dupe block. This is a deck with the only ingredient being power cards, making it nigh impossible to not FTK. This is a deck that went under the radar, and duelists at the time were not prepared for it. It wasn't a clear FTK like decks from the past, since the majority of its cards were both new and complex. By the time it came out of the shadows, it was too late for the metagame. Imagine an FTK deck with enough gas to solitaire without the need for great luck, and a bare minimum to start combos with an additional win con with Colossal Fighter and Armory Arm. I don't say this lightly, but it's one of Yu-Gi-Oh's best decks up to this point, and I can't stress that enough. The summer of 2010 was a fascinating period. In the dawn of the YCS era, we saw a core set that changed the meta. While SJC Edison was unsure of the meta moving forward, the Shining Darkness ensured that the cream would rise to the top. Top decks included Frog FTK, Frog Monarch, X-Saber, Infernity, Anti-Meta Stun, Herald Lock, Blackwing, and Machina Gadget. Shades of the past still existed in lower tier strategies, Glad, Hero variants, Quick Draw Plant, etc. Ultimately, this was a period where the top decks slowly rose above one another with a clear dominance of Frog FTK, Infernity, and X-Saber. Even side deck tech at the time like Consecrated Light, Hanawada, Gotham's Emergency Call, and Royal Oppression could only do so much. At the very least, the end of the format showcased the problem Frog decks were causing, so hopefully Konami moving forward can take care of the issue. I guess we'll find out soon enough.